Good afternoon. I think we can pick up where we left before the lunch break, and Mr. Keenan was going to add another comment concerning a question I was asking about the regional policy statement. And I think that probably Mr. Keenan and I are the only people present who were involved in the preparation of that document.
Commissioner Shepherd, I've managed to sort myself out, and I think that there is one useful amendment I could make to my evidence in chief, which is in paragraph 53, and the sentence which says enabling vegetable rotations across versatile land provides for this objective should actually read does not compromise this objective, right? So that's the one change that I would make, and I can work you through my logic for that. So the objective 5.2.1 does focus on location, design and function, and enables rural production activities in general through clause E of that objective.
Thank you.
Now, objective 15.2.1 in the soils chapter of the RPS is the objective that refers directly to the maintenance of soil quality. And the policies that it refers to as implementing the objective include policies 5.3.1 and policies 5.3.2. Important part to that.
Or is it 15? Sorry, is it 15.3.1?
Yes. No, 15.2.1 is enabled. Objective is by the policies 15.2.1. Oh, sorry, I'll just go to it directly.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the objective is enabled by policies 15.3.1, policy 5.3.1, policy 5.3.2, and policy 5.3.11. The important from the connection I was trying to make in my evidence is that 5.3.2, policy 5.3.2 in the RPS seeks to enable development that can ensure that adverse effects are avoided, remedied or mitigated, and 1C refers explicitly to the soil resource.
It's 1C at 15.3.2, is it?
5.3.2. Policy 5.3.2.
Yes. Well, thank you, Mr. Keenan. Thank you for clarifying that for me. And we're grateful to you for the trouble you've taken over the evidence and for presenting it today.
I certainly appreciate the level of detail which you've obviously read my evidence with, Commissioner. It's a real pleasure.
Now, thanking Mr. Keenan for his contribution as always, I think we now come back to Mr. Claridge, who perhaps was going to make some final closing remark. Is that right, Mr. Claridge?
Yes, correct. Thank you, Commissioner. We'd
Thank you very much.
like to thank the Commissioners today for taking the time to listen to the presentations made and the obvious attention to the evidence that we've submitted. In summation, we'd like to speak to a couple of key points. The key point is that we believe the industry has and is demonstrating a commitment to sustainable production, and we see an ability to grow the industry in a sustainable way and generate value economically that is significant and it is sustainable. And the industry is not typically a cyclical industry, and we see opportunities in the export market as indicated by McCain's, where we have increased our yield by having access to land, and extensive rotations means that we're able to achieve yields in excess of what the Europeans are achieving, and therefore we can remain internationally competitive, not only for imports but also to the some 40 countries that we export our crops to. We see from the growers a commitment to sustainable production and working closely with the processors to ensure that emissions are mitigated and reduced. And we can see already processors who have achieved carbon zero, and we see acknowledgement from growers that reducing emissions is a key objective. You can also see from our industry perspective that we're committed to undertaking research in order to refine the projection, the tools that are available to us. For example, the work that we've undertaken with Overseer in order to validate it and improve it as a projection tool. So I think you can see that overall the industry is making the best efforts it can to create a sustainable growth pathway. And we believe that positions the industry well to grow in the Canterbury region, and we're seeking, in summary, sort of 5 key things. One is that existing operations be consented as controlled activities, and where there's expansion within water zones, that be a controlled activity, and a restricted discretionary activity for expansion across multiple nutrient allocation zones, and as well a collective model or tool that allows growers to group together collectively, because as you can see they're quite mobile and utilise leased land extensively, which in turn means that we can achieve the yields to remain internationally competitive and reduce the inputs that are required, that it would be required if the rotations are tighter. And therefore that is our interest in Schedule 7 and why we're seeking to insert rotation into Schedule 7 to allow us to do that. And the last point is this baseline of the notification of the plan, and as you heard from Guy Slater, their operation simply didn't exist prior to 2013. So therefore we believe we've presented evidence that is compelling, and the industry is making a long-term commitment to a zero emissions target, and you can see the progress is being made well towards that. So we are happy to supply to the requests that the panels have made in terms of supplying notes and presentations as required, and as well the request for supplementary evidence from the Horizons, Section 42A, Anne-Marie Jolly, and I think Stephen McNally's work alongside Anne-Marie Jolly's work would also assist in showing the GMP and BMP framework that has allowed potatoes to get to around about 10 kgs of nitrate emission. And as well, we extend an invitation to the commissioners to, if they feel fit, to come and visit our research and take you further into the research that we are undertaking with the sustainable vegetable systems. So on behalf of the industry, I'd like to thank the commissioners for giving us the opportunity to put forward evidence of our industry, and we are more than happy to supply any further questions if required, answers to any further questions if required.
Well, thank you, Mr. Claridge. Today, you and your colleagues have brought us important and relevant information. You've brought us participants in various aspects of the industry to speak for themselves. You've shown us that the industry is lively. You have made some constructive suggestions and thoughtful ones. So we're grateful to all of you, including your expert consultants, for the way in which you've presented the submission this morning and this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I see Dr. Hume in the distance here. And of course, we warmly welcome him and all the people accompanying him to present to us the interesting submission of Federated Farmers.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
And Dr. Hume, we've already had the advantage of the materials that you've presented to us, so that there'll be some material we already have that we may have some questions on, but I want you to continue to present the materials as you wish. We have read the witness statements as well as the original submission, the further submission, and then I think there was a further submission on top of that. Now, how would you like to proceed, Dr. Hume?
Okay, well, I'll just introduce everybody if that's
Yes,
okay.
yes, please.
And then each of us is available to talk to the specific issues we've raised. As you'll be aware, on this occasion we're talking about addressing the OTOP issues. We're planning to address region-wide issues and Waimakariri issues at a later date on the 2nd of December, I think.
Splendid.
We've chosen to, well, in our most recent statement, highlight a few issues particularly. Obviously, we stand by what we put in our original submission, but we've chosen to highlight some things like the Mataitai Protection Zone, the high-risk phosphorus loss zone, allocation based on reasonable use. Those are three things that come into my head. Anyway, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce on my left to Jason Grant, who's South Canterbury Provincial President of Federated Farmers. further to the left, Mr. Ivan Hurst, who wrote the evidence statement to do with the high-risk phosphorus loss zone. On my immediate right, Mr. Peter Bonifacio, who submitted a statement on the Mataitai protection zone, and similarly, directly behind me, Mr. Brendan Caird, who's also submitted a statement on the Mataitai protection zone. So, yeah, I'd just like to hand over to Jason now, who I think wants to make a very brief overarching statement, and then, yeah, Jason.
Yes.
Thank
Well,
you
thank
very
you, Mr. Grant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shepherd, Mr. Chairman, and for the opportunity to come here and speak to our submission. I've just got a couple of points that I'd like to get out there. PC7 has been widely consulted through the region. Local people have spent many hours researching, meeting, discussing at length, and writing submissions on the draft plan. The essential freshwater package recently released by the government has the potential to put all this work done by locals at risk of being ignored, and I suppose that's probably the perception that some people out in the public might have. And I suppose I'd just like to ask that when you're making your decisions, that PC7 comes front in mind, and because the draft rules have been thrashed out in the community, and the essential freshwater package is something that we could deal with in the future. I suppose that's the feeling I'm getting. Also, too, that I suppose another point that I'd like to make is that we seem to be living in a world where the preservation and restoration of the natural environment takes precedent over everything else. There seems to be little regard taken to the financial cost of these aspirations. My view is a balanced approach is needed, and if we don't find this balance, I have grave concerns for the financial cost of farming businesses in the region, and that the flow-on effects of this will have a major impact on the wider community and has the potential to cause some severe social harm to this community. And I suppose lastly, it's taken us a long time to get to where we are with farming and environment and where things. I'd just like to, a balanced approach to the implementation of rules is needed, and I'm sure with time and science we'll find solutions to most of our problems. So, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Grant. You've obviously thought these things through carefully, and without taking more time than you needed, you've isolated the main issues. Thank you. Thanks. That's a good idea. Now, as far as Mr. Hurst, Mr. Bonifacio and Mr. Caird are concerned, each of the three of you has provided a written statement which we've already read, but my colleague may have questions for one or more of you. Would you like us to go to that now, or what would you like to do next?
Yeah, no, I think we'd like to do that, if that suits you.
Well, Mr. Caird is in the row behind. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, do you have any questions of Mr. Caird?
No, Commissioner Shepherd, I do not.
All right. Now, Mr. Hurst is in the same category, that he's provided a statement of evidence. Any questions of Mr. Hurst?
Yes, I do. Now, just in terms of the concern expressed regarding the high runoff risk phosphorus zone, I just want to make sure I understand the basis for your concern. And you address Rule 14.5.17, and you note that Condition 7 of that rule, it says for any property greater than 20 hectares in area that is located in that zone, the area used for winter grazing does not exceed 20 hectares. And you express concern about that. I guess the issue I have, or the question for you, even if that does occur, you then default to the next rule, 14.5.18, which is a controlled activity, and of course that requires you to gain a consent, but the consent must be granted. So there's no uncertainty about whether or not that consent will be granted, provided you meet the conditions of that rule, none of which relate to the high runoff risk phosphorus zone, they relate to other matters. So I guess I'm struggling to understand the problem.
So the issue really is over control and flexibility. Once we start going for consents, we have to pay. And I see no reason why we should have to pay for any consent of any sort when it shouldn't be needed in the first place.
So do you have any existing resource consents for your farming operation?
I don't, because I operate under the radar.
Does that mean you need consents and you haven't obtained them, or you don't?
No, I don't need consents, and I have no intention of applying for them if I don't have to. I believe in flexibility. The greatest flexibility is where you can make up your mind on the spot, on the land, and go and do what you wish to do on your own land. Once you start to get into a consent process, there's always that question: why is a consent needed? Now, I understand that there is a question mark over farming practices throughout the general population within New Zealand, which is why we seem to be getting towards a position of consenting for as much as possible. And certainly when you hand these issues to planners, they like certainty, which is why they like consents. If one can operate without needing that, then one has a degree of flexibility that cannot be met in quite the same way once one gets into consenting processes. That's a philosophy, if you like. It's my philosophy, but I think if you asked most farmers, they would prefer not to have to consent rather than to consent.
Do you have a farm environment plan for your farm?
No, I have a farm management plan.
Do you have any area of irrigation on your farm?
No, it's dry land.
Yeah.
I pointed that out in the opening remarks.
Okay. All right, now that's clarified your reason for opposing that provision. Thank you for that. No further questions.
Now, Mr. Bonifacio, do you have your statement to confirm?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman.
And
Do I need to read?
no, you certainly don't need to read it out.
Yeah.
That's why we asked you to provide it in advance,
Yep.
so that we could read it and not put you to the trouble of reading it to us.
Yeah. But in summary then, my main concern is the extra cost of regulation required by the rules covering the Mataitai zone. I believe the existing rules under the plan would be sufficient, and that the cost of actually consenting for, in our case, some smaller areas of blocks of land would be quite significant. We already farm what we believe to be under good management practice, which we have demonstrated on our dairy farm operation, which we are consented for and received an A grade on our first audit. We operate the other blocks in a similar manner, and if we did have to consent those blocks under the Mataitai zone, we wouldn't be doing anything different than we're doing now. We operate buffer zones where we grow winter crops and graze. We actually don't irrigate on that block. We also each year soil test each paddock to determine its nutrient requirements and get professional advice on fertiliser usage. And we've fenced off the waterways, which before we purchased the property weren't fenced off, and we put in a reticulated water supply because of that. Prior to that, stock accessed the waterways because there was no alternative water supply. So I can't see any gain from having a consent on these properties in the Mataitai zone. All it will do is incur extra cost,
and this money would be better going towards environmental improvement on the property. And at the end of the day, we're trying to achieve the same things as the local Runanga are in respect to the waterway. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that excellent summary, Mr. Bonifacio. It helps us to understand very clearly what we read in your more full statement. Do you have any questions, Commissioner?
No, I don't. No, I don't. Thank you.
Mr. Bonifacio, are there any activities taking place in or on the edge of your land that would come under even a broad understanding of Mataitai?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
No fishing boats landing or anything like that?
Our dairy farm is situated right on the coast and next to the Opahi or Milford Lagoon. And
yes.
Initially I understood that area was zoned as a Mataitai zone to restrict fishing activity down there, in particular commercial eeling that was going on. And I was in full agreement with that area becoming a Mataitai zone. And it wasn't until the plan release that I realised that the Mataitai zone has suddenly extended up all these tributary rivers as well, and it wasn't actually an aspect of just controlling fishing or eeling. It was also now trying to control farming operations as well through the allocation of the Mataitai zone.
So you're on the coast and you're on the edge of a river. Is
Yes,
that right?
That's right, yes.
And do you see people eeling in that river?
No. We used to get permission from some commercial eelers before the zone came in to access the lagoon through our property to set nets, but since that stopped, we've seen no activity around our property in relation to eeling. The only other activity is white baiting, salmon fishing, and possibly some floundering at the mouth of the Opahi River, and of course trout fishing up the river.
So is any of that, what would you call it, cultural activities? Tangata whenua activities?
Not that I've been aware of, no, basically general public.
Yes. And do they cause you any problem?
No. If they want to, as I say, in the past, if they wanted to access the waterways through our farmland, they've always requested permission first, and
Yes.
I've never had anyone do anything different.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Bonifacio. Thank all of you for coming in. Now, I'm wondering whether we might have a broader discussion or questioning that Dr. Hume may wish to take some further part in. I'm thinking now, Dr. Hume, of the submission itself and the detail that's in it. Are you the person who's going to respond to us about that?
Yes, and Jason or any of the others might join in also.
Yes, but from our already considerable knowledge of your skills and competence, it seemed to me that you might be the person we would direct questions to, even though you may share the answers with the others.
Yep, no, that's absolutely fine.
So, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, do you have questions that you would like to address to Federated Farmers and Dr. Hume in particular?
Yeah, just thank you, Commissioner Shepherd. Just a couple of things from your summary statement, not from the actual initial submission itself. So the first one's not a question, but I just note at paragraph 16 of your hearing statement, you make a suggestion that the stock exclusion rule should apply to waterways wider than 1 metre to align with the recent regulations. So not a question, but just noting that suggestion and just letting you know I can understand the reason why you might suggest that.
Yep.
Paragraph 25, and this touches on the issue that Mr Bonifacio was discussing with Commissioner Shepherd, and so Dr Hume, not a question for you, but to the 42A reporting team, in your reply, can you please respond to the issues raised at paragraph 25 of Dr Hume's summary statement, and I guess also the issues raised by Mr Bonifacio and also Mr Card, in terms of the proposition that the existing provisions adequately deal with the matters that the new mataitae protection policies and rules would seek to deal with. So if you can specifically address that in reply, that would be helpful, thank you. And then, Dr Hume, just an actual question for you now. This relates to the concern you express that paragraphs 52 and 54 relating to Schedule 10 and the emphasis on records of past use. And I'm just struggling, and the emphasis on Method 1 in Schedule 10, and I guess I'm just struggling to understand the problem, given that Method 1 in Schedule 10 addresses records of past use, but it goes on to say that that's to be moderated to ensure the annual volume is sufficient to meet demand conditions that occur in 9 out of 10 years for a system with an irrigation application efficiency of 80%. So it's not solely records of past use, they are to be moderated as expressed in that schedule, so I don't understand why there's a problem.
I guess it's a problem if you haven't got sufficient data, if the records of past use you've got are only for the last few years and those years have been unusually wet or unusually dry or...
Yes, but that's why that goes on to say that would be moderated to ensure that you get sufficient water for 9 out of 10 years with an 80% irrigation application efficiency, which is very much the system that's applied pretty much nationwide at the moment. So,
well, the question I would ask in return is why would, if council is happy with allocation on the basis of 90% reliability, why wouldn't it allow use of any of the methodologies in Schedule 10, because they're all aimed at doing that? And it seems to me, instead of trying to extend a set of data beyond where it actually is, if you've got just a few years of records that are in years that are not typical, why not just use a methodology which can get around that rather than trying to bend a methodology which is potentially problematic? So like Method 2, which is essentially a daily water balance modelling approach, that seems to me to be a more, well, as far as any modelling is bulletproof, seems to me to be a more bulletproof approach.
yeah, I mean,
I just can't we had this discussion
before,
in the original LWRP hearings,
right.
And our point of view, I think, was accepted at that time, and it's cropped up several times since at sub-regional plan hearings too. So I'm just trying to understand why that argument continues to be reinvented.
And I guess to moderate the records of past use, to meet demand conditions that occur in 9 years out of 10, you'd have to run an error calculation anyway to get that answer, wouldn't
Yeah,
you?
well, that's right.
Yeah.
So why not do that in the first place?
Okay. All right. So again, 42AT, maybe you can respond to that and reply as well, whether there is a need to have the direct emphasis on Method 1 of Schedule 10, given that even if we do that, it leads us down an error calc path in all likelihood anyway. All right, no, that was the only question I had for you in terms of the matters that you've raised for the OTOP area.
Dr. Hume, you'll understand that I read pretty closely the submission that you put in on behalf of Federated Farmers, and some of the questions that have arisen in my mind that I ask about are better dealt with when we see you again in the Waimakariri section. Just say so. But there was something that you were asking for concerning proposed rule 5.42 CB. It's on page 10 of the schedule of your submission that you've got in your hand. Now, what I wasn't clear about was whether you were asking for condition 3B to be deleted, or whether you were asking for criterion 3 to be deleted. You see, there's conditions in the first group, and then there's what they call exercise of discretion, which I call criteria. And which wasn't, because I wasn't clear about that from your submission.
Okay, I haven't quite got to where you are yet. Were you referring to the actual submission itself, or the?
Yes, that's right.
Yep.
In the schedule part, at page 10, at the bottom of the page, just take your time, there's no rush.
Yep.
And at least on my version, you have to turn it round, it's landscape.
Oh, yeah, okay, yep.
And the last item on the page relates to Rule 542, capital C, capital B. And although it says in column 2, support in part, when you get to column 4, it says delete condition 3. Now, I've pulled out 542 CB in front of me, and this, as I say, there's two lots of little bits in it. The first lot of what I'd call conditions.
Conditions, yeah.
The next lot of what they call exercise of discretion, which I call criteria, and I wasn't sure which of them you were wanting to be deleted, and I thought, well, I need to know which one it is before I can decide whether I agree with you.
Could you refresh my memory as to what the actual rule says? I haven't got a copy of it in front of me.
Now, has Ms. Edwards brought you the revised version?
Yes, no, it's clear now. It was actually condition 3 that I was talking about.
Condition 3, not criterion 3. So it's the one about all land that forms part of commercial vegetable growing operation is located in the same sub-region.
Yes.
And in
Yeah.
That's the one you deleted.
Yeah. No, it seemed to me that was a matter of administrative convenience. I guess it's much more tidy if they're all in the same nutrient management area, but why should that be the case? If someone's straddling a boundary, they shouldn't be at a particular disadvantage simply for having done that. Was my concern.
Very well, thank you. Now the next one is another question about your submission. If we go to the next, if we go down to page 13. And there's one there you'll see that concerns Rule 5.140. And it says in the right-hand column, sentence 2, rewrite condition 5B to clarify the culvert installation requirements. Can you see where I am?
Yes, yes.
Now, because we've had the good fortune to meet each other several times, you know and I know that we're expecting submitters to give details of what it is that they want by way of an improvement to plan change. And I couldn't quite see there, notwithstanding that I recognised that Dr. Hume would have written this, I couldn't see where it gave the details of the new version that it wanted in place of what was there. Can you direct me to that?
Well, you're quite right to point out that we haven't given the details because we simply haven't given the details. The position, I do recall writing that. I should have come back to it and thought about it again, obviously. But my concern was that when I read the culvert installation requirements, it wasn't clear to me what they actually meant. And I guess if it's not clear to me, it may be clear to most people, but possibly not to everybody. So, yeah, I expressed the concern, but my apologies, I didn't detail it.
You didn't write it the way you thought it ought to be written.
No.
Just so that you'd say, oh, yes, we agree with that.
Yeah.
No, all right.
I can have a go at doing that if you like.
Well, it's too late in the process
Okay,
now, as
right,
you know.
okay, fair enough.
All right. Well, now, would you like to turn on to page 21? Now, on page 21, you'll see that you've got a submission point about policy 8.4.20. And in the comment about it, you say there's a practical difficulty in implementing the policy. And I wasn't clear what the practical difficulty was. I may be the only person who's not clear about it. But I thought, well, it's right that I should tell you that I'm not clear what the practical difficulty is, so you've got the opportunity to explain it if you'd like.
Yeah, I guess the point that I was trying to make there is that as it's written, the policy is a little bit too constraining. And, yeah, my recollection is that abstraction of any water used for augmentation is prevented. Well, how do you separate the water that's provided for augmentation from the water that was already there in the first place? That's one slight difficulty. And also, there's sometimes good reasons to take water which may have been supplied during the process of augmentation for a purpose that might have an environmental benefit. And one example of that is to provide reliability of supply. It's easier to manage water in an environmentally appropriate manner if supply is reliable, if an abstractor knows that water will be there when it's needed, rather than having to operate on a use it or lose it basis, or via some other process that's less environmentally focused, I guess.
Well, you'll understand, I'm sure, that I needed to understand that, so that when we come to it, I know what you had in mind.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, page 33, rule 8.5.6. So, if I've understood it correctly, you're wanting precedence for current reliability.
Yes.
Would that be a fair summary of it?
Yes.
So, can you direct me to what the basis in the RMA would be for that? Or in the NPS FM 20?
I guess, I had a number of things in my head when I was considering this. Firstly, and I see this as being also picked up by the reporting officers, an additional allocation when a resource is already fully allocated or possibly over-allocated is probably not something that's going to work terribly well. The reliability issue, I would guess, isn't referred to directly in the RMA or I'm not sure if the NPS says much about reliability, but reliability is important, and it enables water to be used in a more effective and efficient manner, which I would have thought, which does have environmental benefits. It means that people aren't actually taking water or have no incentive to take water unless they actually need it and can use it for some good purpose. So I guess those would be my two arguments. And a resource that's already fully allocated, not a great idea to have additional allocation, for which the purpose is not entirely clear. And secondly, from the perspective of efficient and effective use of water, best to have good reliability.
So when we're talking or thinking about what takes precedence whether it's current reliability or some other claim, particularly now we have these obligatory priorities in the NPSFM. When we're thinking of precedence, we're thinking about something that's similar to a priority, are we?
Yes.
And would that obligatory priority not be for whatever is the current reliability for an abstract tool, but some more philosophical priority, such as Te Mana o Te Wai and the habitats for Mahinga Kai?
Well, I guess Te Mana o Te Wai and ecological habitat, for Mahinga Kai species or anything else for that matter, is a top priority, but that will presumably be taken into account when environmental flow and allocation regimes are set. And these people with existing consents to take it, but whatever reliability they already have, those are things that already exist. If consents are reviewed, then I guess at that point a whole bunch of things are going to be taken into account, including Te Mana o Te Wai and including Mahinga Kai species, including all species that live in fresh water.
I certainly understand that.
And I guess part of my thinking too came from the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, not that that's a law, but it's certainly been the basis on which a lot of thinking about allocation of water and use of water in Canterbury has been based on, and that certainly among its target areas includes reliability of supply.
I'm understanding you now. Thank you. On the question of existing permits expiring, question replacement, there's an item on page 35 of your schedule in respect 8513. Where a prohibited activity is being questioned by you, and you're proposing instead amend that to non-compliant. And then we come down to the same page, 2 down, 8515, concerning replacement of existing consents, and you're saying non-complying activity status is appropriate for that. Just not quite clear that I'm grasping the point that you're seeking there. You've got the combination of those two submission points on 8513 and 8515, but without sort of being too confining in a question, I thought I'd just give you the opportunity to explain your point of view, or the point of view of Federated Farmers, in respect of this question where a permit has expired and a replacement is being applied.
Okay, so which was the first rule that you were referring to?
8513.
Yep.
And then 8518. But no, it's 15, I think.
Yep. Yeah, as far as 8513 goes, I requested non-complying activity status because I didn't think that conditions 1 to 3 of 8.5.12 were necessarily things that should send us in the direction of prohibited activity status.
Well, we can give some thought to that.
Yeah.
Then if we come over the page to 8518, and you're wanting to delete criterion 8. Adverse effects on Ngāi Tahu issues. You wanted to delete number 6 about leaving 100 metres, and you wanted to do something about condition 4 as well. Did you want to delete condition 4 or not taking place on an archaeological site?
Yeah, no, it was condition 6 we wanted to delete. The discharge is not within 100 metres of an abstraction used to supply drinking water. And this was, I had a specific situation in mind with this one where there was a water being taken from a well to augment a water body, and the well was right close to where the water body was, and it was also used to provide drinking water. So there was clean water coming out of the well. Some of it was being put into the water body. Some of it was being used for drinking water supply. Both in the same spot essentially. So having the augmentation some distance away from where the take was seemed to be difficult and unnecessary in that instance. So it seemed to me that this condition was potentially problematic.
It's always helpful to have an instance like that rather than just dealing with it
in an abstract way.
Concept. Yes, that's helpful. Thank you. Now, you wanted a definition of augmentation. That's on page 41. But you've just used the word, obviously you know what it means.
Okay, whereabouts on page 41?
Page 41.
Yep.
Yes. Can't find it myself now. No, here it is. It's in relation to CLWRP district, and it's amongst the definitions there. Do you see this on page 41? Under the subheading section 11.
Yep.
Column 1, you say you're dealing with the definition of augmentation. Column 2, you say you oppose it in part. Column 4, you say delete it unless there's a clear and demonstrable advantage in retaining it. In my rather unreal mind, you might say, I make a difference between a definition and a rule. A definition tells what we mean by a term and how far it extends, and a rule tells you it's allowed or it's not allowed, or you need consent or something like that. So is your concern about the definition, or is your concern about some rule where the definition is used?
Yeah, I would need to think about that a little bit more. I wasn't thinking we'd be talking about this today, but my concern...
If you'd rather deal with it later, I'm quite happy with that. Deal with it again when we come back to it.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, just what comes into my mind is that the definitions were being adjusted in a way that, well, if you take a dictionary definition of augmentation, well, it could refer to either augmentation of surface water or augmentation of groundwater. And
yes,
I just wasn't convinced about the necessity to drag those two things apart when sometimes they weren't that far apart, because augmentation of groundwater can lead to augmentation of surface water, and the two things aren't completely distinct, I don't think. But yeah, happy to think about that and talk about it in more detail next time if you like.
Yeah, I think that's... I'm only trying to get a full understanding of the case.
Yes.
And there's no advantage to me in insisting that we take your answer now and not allow you to explain it fully when you've thought about it. That's not my aim at all.
Thank you.
So if you'd like to come back to that and take this as notice of a question,
yep,
I'd be very grateful to you. Now, there was another one I wasn't sure about, and it's page 48. (13.536). And you want to delete condition 4, which is about discharge not to be within 100 metres of a potable water well. This comes back to the example you were thinking of a minute ago, I think.
So that request would have been made for exactly the same reason.
So let me see if I've understood it correctly. Federated Farmers is saying a discharge within 100 metres of a potable water well should be a restricted discretionary activity rather than a full discretionary activity. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it should. There shouldn't be too much of a barrier for having a discharge of water for augmentation purposes close to
a source of drinking water.
A source of drinking water, yes, because, well, in some cases it'll be one and the same source of water, and I guess with any water used for augmentation there's some fairly tight constraints on the quality of that water.
Yes, well, quite so. So you're thinking more in terms of the quality of the water than the quantity?
Yes, yeah. Well, I guess both are important, but I was thinking that the concern was arising potentially for quality reasons. I was thinking that the reason for keeping the augmentation separate from wells that supplied drinking water, that requirement would be for water quality reasons rather than quantity, perhaps.
One more, if I can trouble you, please, Dr. Hume. Page 73. Read table 14.8. And you say, delete the Milford Lagoon and the Iraqi Power Creek from table 14.8 unless the rights of existing water consent holders are safeguarded. Now that's a bit of a mystery for me. During the unreviewed portion of the life of a resource consent, the consent may continue to be exercised. So what basis is there in terms of the Act or the new NPS for the regional plan continuing those rights after that? Surely the whole purpose of having a fixed term for a water permit is that when it expires, you review it according to the circumstances of the time. So why would you have in the plan something that gives the existing water consent holders safeguarded rights? The Act gives it to them anyway until their consents are reviewed or expire.
Yeah, I guess my feeling there is that if someone's got a consent, they've made investments, organised their life around having a consent. I realise that these things aren't forever and everyone understands that, but
that's my point.
Yeah. But likewise, the fact that someone's got a consent and does depend on it, potentially, has probably made considerable investment in working with it. That's a pretty important point too. And it may be that Jason or Ivan wants to add to that too, I don't know.
Well, we're not here just to focus on any particular representative. If any of you who are here representing Federated farmers would like to add to Dr. Hume's response, well, feel free.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about consenting, if I could. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
I suppose for a bit of an example, we've got a farm in the Albury district that we've recently got a consent for. It's a downy it's about a 300 hectare downy farm, clay down type farm, that we use for wintering our cows. Now under the rules that we're presently working under, it required a consent because more than 10% of the property is growing grain feed, winter feed. So completely accept that it's deemed to be a bit of a high risk property, so it required a consent. Now the cost for that consent for that property was about $8,000. It's quite a considerable amount of money considering the size of the property. So yeah, I think it's around the cost of consent. If a consent is definitely not required, we definitely prefer if we didn't need a consent. So, and another reason for that too is that farming businesses are quite capital hungry, and majority of the profits go back into the properties to enhance them and I suppose just repairs and maintenance, but capital improvements. And I suppose in recent years, with a realisation of the impacts of farming is having on the environment, a lot of these capital improvements have been environmental ones, and it's really quite common. Fencing waterways, I know myself what we've spent on environmental enhancements on our properties. So I suppose their argument is that if there's not a really good reason to have a consent, the rules are in place, people will stick to the rules and on the most part. So any money that goes to a consent that's not completely necessary could well have been ploughed back into the property for environmental enhancements. I suppose that's my my view on that subject, really.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Grant. Anything further to be said about that? Well, I think that's all the questions I have for you, Dr. Hume, and thank you for your response and this one that you're going to come back to when we meet again.
Yes.
So is there anything further to be said on the Federated Farmers submission, or is that completed? Anybody going to make a final address, a closing address, or should we take it that that's already been covered by what you've already said?
No, I think that's covered everything we need to, and I thank you for your time and the opportunity to make this submission and time to listen to us. Mr. Chairman.
Well, we're very grateful because the task that we do depends on particularly collectives like Federated Farmers having a good look at the plan change and bringing attention to where things aren't right or whether they can be improved. And as in the case of the submission here, nearly always coming up with a constructive suggestion to how it can be improved. And for that reason, we're particularly grateful to Federated Farmers for the submission on Plan Change 7, and we look forward to discussing with you again the activities in respect of the Waimakariri district. But perhaps, well, you'll be part of it, Dr. Hume, and perhaps you'll be accompanied by other representatives.
And Jason will be there also.
I'll be there again as well.
Splendid. Well, we look forward to that. Well, thank you very much for coming in this afternoon. We're very grateful.
Thank you very much.
Because I'm just looking through this, what I've got saved here, and that's printed on this. It's just a little bit different. Like my last pages.
Now, Ms. Fernando, is Seaforth coming in this afternoon, or are they coming in tomorrow morning?
They're coming in tomorrow.
Tomorrow. So is anyone else coming this afternoon?
No.
Well, then in the hearing till tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, thank you. Adjourned accordingly.